Jon Summers is the motoring historian. He was a company car thrashing technology sales rep that turned into a fairly inept sports bike rider. Hailing from California, he collects cars and bikes built with plenty of cheap and fast, and not much reliable. On his show, he gets together with various co hosts to talk about new and old cars, driving, motorbikes, motor racing, and motoring travel.
Good day, good morning, good afternoon. It is Jon Summers, the motoring historian. Scalable digital twins for software-defined vehicles. What does that even mean, you might say? And if you've not been listening to these ones that I've done that are about the software-defined car or AI state of the nation, this is kind of a TLDR on those, or a bit of a bolt-on onto those. It's the same speaker series that I've been to down there in Silicon Valley, organised by the Society of Automotive Engineers and Dr. Sven Beeker. So thank you again, Sven, for inviting me. The speaker this time with these guys, Remotive Labs. I mean, I'll add the link and so on, so you can have a little look at who they are and what they do. But fundamentally, all of the speakers in this series have been people organizations, companies that are involved in, the building blocks of the new software-defined vehicle. And I think the software-defined vehicle is the end of cars as being something that's about freedom. And it's the beginning of being something which is, as the McKinsey guy said in the software-defined car presentation that I went to, it makes the car an edge of cloud device. It makes it like your phone. It means that there's some compute on your phone. You can download stuff to it. There's some computing power on it. But most of your phone's functionality comes via its connectivity to the cloud. And the wonderful engineering integrity that tomorrow's cars are going to have, that's going to come from the cloud. It's not going to come from the piece of hardware that's sitting on your driveway. So if you think of it, 100 years ago, Fred and Augie Duesenberg created the very best machine they could. And when you drove it off the forecourt, it was yours completely. It was yours. It was your domain. Now, it's not, is it? I mean, you might pay for it. You probably don't even own it outright. You're probably leasing it. But even if you do pay for it outright, what we're now talking about is over the airwaves upgrades, that you're at night sleeping and, your Tesla gets an upgrade so it can recharge its batteries that much faster. This is the world of the 21st century. Oh, yes. So it means that the car that you drive off the driveway in the morning is actually not the same as the one that you parked in the driveway the night before. And you don't have any idea what changes may have been made to it. So I don't want to be all dystopian about over the airwaves upgrades, but for fuck's sake, just give me the keys and let me go. It's about freedom. It's about freedom. It's not about a connected device. And I'm sorry, sir, I can't. I'm sorry, sir. You're going to have to go through the touch screen, and I'm sorry, sir. Are you sure you want to shut me down? Yes, I really am sure I want to shut you down and flush you down the loo. Any car that makes me want to communicate with it through the touch screen. I know Tesla are big into this, right? I've not really experienced a car that's got it. Of course, it's much cheaper if you can just have a button in a piece of software than a button on a real dashboard, isn't it? So that's clearly the thinking behind it. Oh, the design's so clean, the Teslarati will tell me. I'll say balls to that. It's all about making it cheap. A Furious Driving, a YouTuber who I follow, recently reviewed a Geely, which is being sold in Britain. Of course, it's being sold at a great price, tons of content, but everything has to be run through the screen. And I was amused that as he was trying to toggle to turn off the annoying lane assist thing that was trying to put him into the hedge of the country road that he was driving along, as he was toggling to try and turn that off, the car was getting cross with him because it had detected his eyes weren't on the road. And I'm just like, you machines can all get in the fucking sea. You can all get in the sea, right? The car just needs to do what you tell it to, like a hammer. You tell it go, it goes. I actually think I wrote an article about this some years ago. I actually think the cusp for this change was in the 80s and the 90s. So, in other words, my 95 Mustang with no ABS and no traction control, free as a bird. Wrap it around a lamppost if you want. It's not going to stop you. The '01 car that I have, although its character's completely the same, feels exactly the same to drive, the ABS and the traction control mean that there is a committee of electronic nannies, and I'll attribute that to Jeremy Clarkson, that's how he described it, a committee of electronic nannies that have to approve what you're doing before it happens. You push the throttle and the car's like, let me see, is there gravel on the road? Ooh, you've got a live axle. What might... No, right? No, that's not free. But anyway, I didn't sit down and do this recording to get up on my fuck the software-defined car soapbox. No, I didn't do that at all. No, I hit the record button here so that we can all know exactly what stage we're at, blow by blow, as driving is being de-invented. So, scalable digital twins for software-defined vehicles. What in the actual F does that mean? What it means is these guys, Remotive Labs, have a software product or a suite of software products which replicate in a virtual form components which haven't yet been developed. So let's say that it's your job to develop the suspension system for the new Polestar, whatever. And in order for you to develop the suspension system, you have to know what the brakes look like. But the brake guys haven't yet designed their brake rotor, so you can't do any engineering around it. So what this leads to in traditional car development is, if it takes 5 years to develop the car, like halfway through year 4, everyone finishes what they're doing. And then you have what they're calling integration hell, where you guess that the brake rotor was going to be one size and actually it's a different size from that. And now your solution for the suspension doesn't work properly. Except it's not physical components that we're waiting on here, is it? It's not. It's not like, we're waiting for Brembo to cast us the brakes. Like, when are they going to do us those new chuffy rotors? No, it's not that. And that's perhaps what was most depressing about this presentation. Although we talked about cars the whole time, we weren't talking about actual cars and engineering. We weren't talking about the traditional stuff of automotive engineering. We were talking about software. And that's really what we're talking about here, that until the body control people have written their software properly, the HVAC entertainment people can't write their piece of software properly. So Remotive Labs, what we're creating is virtual bits of infrastructure to allow testing. What this means is that testing can take place much sooner in the cycle. So they have this cool little graphic, which basically, you look at the graphic and you understand completely what it is they're doing, is that they've got all these like silos, and all of the silos are working independently to go and create the final car. And this leads to this integration hell. Well, now, because everyone can virtualize what each other are doing, the integration takes place at the beginning. So their integration is super smooth. And they had like a red jagged graph and then a nice smooth green one. They were Swedish, by the way, two sort of middle-aged guys, but both of them looking very Valley on brand, I would say. So although my age, older than me, they were T-shirts and they were trendy, jeany kind of trousers and, flat canvasy kind of shoes. These dudes, you wouldn't confuse this guy with the CEO of British Steel. You know what I mean? These are not the traditional people who you would see as suppliers to the automotive industry, although they do very much fit in with, the way that Valley people walk and talk, and Valley people and all of the car makers have a presence in the Valley, and all of these software-defined car efforts are led by Valley people with this kind of Palo Alto aesthetic. I wrote, what is being pitched here is integration testing. The path to a product with over-the-airwaves upgrades is shorter and smoother. So I also wrote down that this isn't hardware development, it's about management of a software stack, that it's ECMs, it's GPUs, it's the stuff that NVIDIA hasn't bought because, the crypto miners have got it instead kind of thing. It's those kind of products that we're needing to virtualize. It is not the sort of suspension and brake components, which I was thinking about. And in fact, at no point in the presentation did we talk about anything that might be considered traditional automotive engineering. And I really need to have you sort of stop and let that sink in to see how completely the car has become a mobile phone. Because even the suspension and the brakes, all of that shit can be controlled by the brain, right? So if you want the car to have better suspension, well, it can just move the active ride in a different way. And that's how the direction in which we're going here. So not only are we not talking about those suspension and brake and those kind of traditional automotive components, not only are we not talking about them for examples, those things are rather like nuts and bolts now. The design of them, it hasn't been perfected, but the design of them is sufficiently well understood that we know that if we want of a particular high quality, we have to pay for an extra kind of alloy, and we have to pay for it to be machined in a certain way, to have a nice flange on it and to have a hex head on it. Whereas if we don't care, we could just rattle them out like they do carpentry nails, where they're just cast out of pig iron and they bend. So what? You just chuck it away and have another kind of thing. So that's a sea change. That it's the end of cars as we've known them in the 20th century, right? It's the end of there actually being something to talk about around the business of motivating the car down the road and allowing it to negotiate bumps better or be easier to repair, or all of that stuff. None of that was remotely considered by these guys in this presentation. It's all about integration of different software products. So, of course, what it means is that testing in future is going to involve a blend of actual components and virtual components. And I've been unable to shake this thought in the day since I went to the presentation. The morning before I went to the presentation, I was chatting with somebody about the Mary Rose. If you're English, you'll know what the Mary Rose is. If you're not, you won't. It was King Henry VIII's top quality warship. It was the weapon of mass destruction of the day. And as with so many of things, it had a Titanic-like sinking experience. But of course, it's made of wood, so it rotted away, right? Anyway, docks in Southampton, Portsmouth got a new display. And the historian that I was chatting to had recently been to it. And he talked about how it was awesome because what they'd done was they'd taken things that were really there, like pewter vases, and then they put black plastic where the handle had been. So if the handle had gone broken off, they put black plastic on there. So you could see what was original and you could see what they modeled so that you could see what this thing looked like actually in context rather than it just being a crappy piece of meaningless broken pottery. As students used to say to me when we walked around the forum, what's this building site? Yeah, exactly. What's this construction zone? That's what the forum looks like because it's just a piece of broken pottery. They've not thought to contextualize it within its place, not just on a table, not just in a vase on a table, but on the Mary Rose and as part of Henry VIII's warship, and not just as part of Henry VIII's warship, but as part of everything that Henry VIII himself symbolized as, the end of the Wars of the Roses and what he symbolizes as a, historical figure today, right? All of those things can come from that one piece of pottery. To me, we're in a place where the testing is going to take place on the fragment of vase. That's the actual thing that each siloed engineering team is working on. And their testing environment is going to be completely virtual. This boggles the mind a little bit, right? Because the whole thing about a test is that the way things work in theory and the way things work in practice is completely different. And now what we're having is a system of virtual testing. So we're going to test in a not real world environment. How can that be testing? The whole thing about testing is it takes place in the real world. Well, you say, the founder of Remotive Labs would probably have said, well, the integration testing would still take place at the end. We just allow you to speed up the testing process. So integration testing from day one. I talked about the silos, and I talked about the information flowing from the silos straight away rather than, integration testing. Out of the box, a full integration testing system. So that now we get into the stage of, all right, I know that, you're going to fill me up with burger and fries, but when I'm actually at the counter ordering, how does that work? What does the Happy Meal look like? How much is the Big Mac and fries versus the quarter pounder? So that all seemed to be, in comparison to other software defined vehicle AI kind of companies, this all seemed more baked, to be honest. I've not been to their website and looked. They only talked about having one client who seemed to be Polestar based upon the sample names in their presentation. But it does seem like if you approach them, you wouldn't be a prototype site for them. If you approach them and engage them, they have something which is out of the box. And that brings me back to that phrase that I've used a couple of times before, but I find it helpful to think with these kind of mnemonics to get my head around what's really happening here. The path to a product with over-the-air waves upgrades is shorter and smoother. That's what they're doing. That's what they're trying to do. And the fact that there are so many automotive makers who want that, who that's a compelling problem to be solved for, or the fact that there's anybody out there that these guys feel they're comfortable pitching that message, that is what's interesting. If there's a guy outside a stadium selling hot dogs, he might not be selling any hot dogs, but the fact that he's there says something about the fact that there might be demand. That's what. So I wrote here that traditional automotive engineering is going the way of steam locomotive engineering. I have a biography of Sir Nigel Gresley up on my bookshelf there. And, in the first half of the 20th century, he was like an Adrian Newey kind of a figure in terms of steam engine design and engineering. Nobody's fucking heard of him now, have they? Was my thought. And the Mallard, the steam engine that did 120 miles an hour. I mean, it's an awesome thing, but it's really right back there with the spinning Jenny, isn't it? And it was even when I was a boy growing up, in the 70s and the 80s, the Mallard and steam power, it was something of the past. It was already historicized, right? And that's why I'm using that example because, it's like a Le Mans winning car, isn't it? No, or a Formula One car. No longer does it win no sooner does it win its last race than it immediately becomes a museum piece and the technology moves on. And I suppose I hadn't anticipated as part of this software-defined car revolution that we were going to lose people like Adrian Newey. There were going to be no Adrian Neweys in the future because those kind of brains just weren't going to be interested in designing cars because we've done that, just like the zeitgeist has moved on and a brilliant brain like Sir Nigel Gresley would not have been involved in. I hope I've made my point there. One interesting thing that he did say, and this is an interesting facet of these presentations, is that quite often the most interesting part of the evening are the questions. But quite often, I would say for every one question that's really compelling and leads to a pearl of wisdom that makes you really glad that you came, that pearl alone would have been worth the evening out of the house kind of. That's offset by the fact that maybe it's the engineering audience, although I find the same happens with historians and social scientists, but somebody takes you down this boring rat hole and I just tuned out and I can find it hard to tune back in, even if the presenter's answer is a compelling one. But one point that he made was that Westerners like bespoke performance solutions, whereas Chinese engineers will make do with off-the-shelf components and will integrate that. And I think that's a really interesting philosophy. now I'm replaying it, I wonder if you listen to the presentation that I did with Valio that was about the history of LIDAR, or looked at, where we are with LIDAR development, or where we were, 18 months ago, or whenever I went to that, I was struck there by how the LIDAR developers were all in bed with one particular German company. And it made me wonder how political Tesla's public rejection of LIDAR was, and how the Germans' embrace of LIDAR was perhaps less about the technology and more as a desperate attempt to give themselves some differentiation from this aggressive new player in the market. It's a very cynical thought, but now I've said it out loud again, I feel that it's really not unlikely that that's the case, especially given that, German autonomous cars are meant to operate at 150 miles an hour, at a much higher level of veracity, if that's the right word. It's not. They basically have to be high quality, just like an AMG Benz is designed to do 150 miles an hour on the Autobahn with 5 people and their luggage in it. Other cars aren't designed to that kind of standard. The same thing's going on here, I think, perhaps with LIDAR design. So perhaps that's why Westerners like bespoke performance solutions, and the Chinese are, more ready to make do. Maybe it's not a cultural thing. Maybe it's a price point and marketing thing. Maybe Stellantis are going to be doing something which is more, off the shelf and integrate. Although, interestingly, I do remember the Valeo guy saying that Stellantis wanted to take all of their, if you like, the firmware. Remember, if you listen to their LIDAR presentation, they were like, some people just want to take the LIDAR device. Other people want to take the LIDAR device, the hardware, but they also want to take our kind of bespoke software, our like firmware almost, or our interpreter. In other words, we got some stuff programmed in that let you say, like, if it's got small and 4 legs, it's a dog. If it's large and 4 legs, it's a cow. If it's, got 2 wheels, it's a bicycle. So in other words, your device, your AI, your ECM doesn't need to have the horsepower, because we're already doing some pre-interpretation for it, if that makes sense. I'm not sure how clear my point here is, but I suppose what I'm trying to say is that traditionally the Germans used to charge more for a premium product because it drove better, right? It was better to sit in. It went around corners better, it accelerated faster, it had a high top speed. When you were on the freeway, it was quieter. There were those kind of of reasons, and the whole world of car magazines and journalism, and what was a good car and what was a bad car, and what impressed people in the company car park, and all of that stuff was all wrapped up with that kind of performance. And I wonder if the Germans aren't trying to do the same thing with their techno functionality. I mean, BMW definitely seem to be, don't they? Perhaps it's a statement of the obvious. Perhaps that's what they are trying to do. And perhaps the Remotive guy, by saying Westerners like bespoke performance solutions, and the Chinese are more happy to make do with off-the-shelf solutions and integrate, perhaps that's just a different way of saying that. One question was about what actually is spat out of a simulation. So what kind of report was it? I can't remember what the answer was, but I just thought that illustrates that kind of I'm at the counter, I've ordered a burger and fries. When the burger and fries come, what do they look like? Am I getting a tray? Is it wrapped? Am I going to need a napkin? That's the stage that the audience are at with this kind of technology. They're not blown away by the concept of this. They're like, no, I get the burger and fries. I get the fast food. I get that. I'm interested in whether or not there's gherkins and is the coffee free or not. That's where the audience were thinking. So I think the final point that came out of the questioning was from like an old coot at the front. And you've got to believe when you go to one of these events in Silicon Valley, some old coot wearing a hoodie at the front. I mean, he could be a partner at a Silicon Valley VC firm, because the VC guys, if you don't know the way Silicon Valley's laid out, if you've come from like the city of London or any kind of a European financial center, it's kind of weird. Firstly, because the valley's all like low rise, and secondly, when you realize that not only is Stanford the model for all the tech campuses, so all the tech campuses feel like Stanford's campus, which is a bit weird because it means that all of these people who like left Stanford and went to Google or left Stanford and went to Apple, they went from one place where they worked with a bunch of people who were exactly like them, riding around on bikes at a really nice campus, to another place that looked exactly like that. And the only difference was how much you got. I mean, Berkeley's not like that. Berkeley felt like Leeds. It felt like a gritty educational institution that had been there for 100 years. Stanford does not feel that way at all. And one of the weirdnesses of Stanford is the road connecting it to the freeway is venture capital central. All the venture capital firms that you've heard of in association with funding either early stage startups or late stage ones, they're all right there on that drag. It's a bit like the first time you work the City of London and you realise that you really can do one meeting and it really is just going to be 5 minutes round the corner to another meeting. So you can literally book meetings every hour and not be late. The question this older bloke in a hoodie asked was around what actually is the main, I can't remember how he framed it, but basically he was like, what's the biggest cock block to getting adopted? And they said political resistance within the organization. And he said, because it's such a revolutionary approach. But if you just stop and think about that, that is a total showstopper, isn't it? Because at the moment, if the head of silo A, the head of silo B, and the head of silo C, they might have gripes with each other, but they each have their own process, which they've been following and has been working just fine. And when you rock up and say, yeah, now you guys are going to have to share from the beginning. So that means that right from the start, I'm trying to design my brake rotor, but I've got to have meetings with you so that I get some idea of what your suspension looks like so that I can already begin integration testing. I mean, it just feels like, we had a process that was working and now you've come along and changed it all. And I think that for me was a reminder of what it's like to actually sell these kind of software products, is that in the kind of safe environment of that kind of presentation, the concept seems awesome, revolutionary, compelling. But when you actually meet the reality of those three silos now all having to work together and work in a completely different way, I feel like whatever efficiencies you might gain could easily be lost in like the reimagining of the whole process. And certainly there would be significant productivity losses, as ever where there is in these kind of software products, in the actual integration and training and setup and persuading people to use itness of it all. So to conclude, these Remotive guys seem to have a product which was highly baked, and it definitely seemed to have a need which was developed well based upon the questions that were asked. The people asking questions, they weren't being like, well, is it even going to fill me up? They were asking questions like, I want fries with that. When's the McFlurry coming? Those were the kind of questions that the audience were asking. But you've still got this like hugely disruptive kind of process. So, for me, if I put my software sales guy hat on, for the next interview, I would have really wanted to talk to some customers, and I would have really wanted a warm feel that they weren't just in bed with one company, because that was my worry. And I should go to their website and have a look around, and I might be misleading you with this, but you don't want a situation where they're only in bed with one company and they're completely in lockstep with what they're doing. So you as a salesperson, you can't really sell the product to anybody else because it's like left-handed scissors, only works for 10% of the population. Thank you, Drive-Through.
This episode has been brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports as part of our Motoring Podcast Network. For more episodes like this, tune in each week for more exciting and educational content from organizations like the Exotic Car Marketplace, the Motoring Historian, Break Fix, and many others. If you'd like to support Grand Touring Motorsports and the Motoring Podcast Network, sign up for one of our many sponsorship tiers at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. Please note that the content, opinions, and materials presented and expressed in this episode are those of its creator, and this episode has been published with their consent. If you have any inquiries about this program, please contact the creators of this episode via email or social media as mentioned in the episode.